Good night, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. So, I chose to do question one, which deals with the analysis of spoken word. We're going to jump straight into it. Right? So, this is a piece that I chose. It's entitled Tabanca Real but Depression Not by Marcus Millet. Let's take a look at the piece.
We have a way with us disciplined children in the Caribbean. After we break a broomstick on the back, we just ask, what you crying for? And if they ever made the mistake and laugh while getting a cut ass, well, we just cut their ass more. Then when they start to cry again, we just say, you better hush your mouth before you really get something to cry for. As if the pain of a leather belt, a broom, or a pot spoon is not reason enough to express pain. Calling licks never kill nobody, let me be real. You never really had a good childhood if you never get a good cut. But for some reason, we just try to reinforce silence when in pain. So as children, we learn to take licks and pretend like we don't feel anything. So by the time you reach adolescence, you're supposed to know to remain silent when pain unbearable, whether it's emotional or physical. Because depression and mental illness is why people think. And at this age, you're too big to be all up in your feelings, your Caribbean one. You have a tabanca? Because the only version of depression Caribbean people know. We were raised by the belt and statements like you're going mad, hush your mouth. Look, child, don't make my half till your ass today. Eh? You're stupid. You feel like one of your little friend and them with you. And yeah, we find that funny, end. But when you walk into your child's room and see them hanging from the leather belt you used to incur the black and blue bruise, I hope you could untie them with the same hands you once armed with anything in arm's reach to discipline, instilling in children that anything you feel will eventually pass because it's just a little pain and pain don't ever last. One day, this might even be a funny story, so take a second to laugh as I put your problem second to last. We just have that kind of culture for comedy that don't allow we to take nothing too serious. But where the joke? When every time we see a friend going mad, we just all day on coke or weed smoke. It's either that or they take a pull in a black. It's this kind of culture that pulling us back to the point where we're not seeing that the country stick, shit, stop in reverse as we try to move forward, but only revert. Back is a lack of remorse with no room for discourse to discuss issues without excuse to execute compassion when a friend comes to confide in you because they have nowhere else to turn to. Tell me how come as a people we could believe in Tabanca, but not severe depression. When you ask someone how they're feeling, but never listen after you ask the question. When you tell your friend it's okay to cry and not provide a shoulder for their head to rest on, we say, God, don't give you more than you can handle, but it's hard. When emotions tear through your skin, and generations before been telling you that even when in pain, remain silent like silence is discipline. Don't come out and don't say nothing. Don't say nothing. Don't say nothing. Don't say.
So, that's the piece, right? It essentially speaks about the Caribbean parents' questionable and sometimes poor decisions in child rearing, right? And how it affects the child, but ultimately how justified the parents feel in their actions. So they don't see the wrong and they don't consider the effects their actions have on their children. Right, so we're gonna jump straight into the characteristics. Right, so some of the characteristics that can be seen in the piece are alliteration, sarcasm, personification, rhyme, and repetition. Alliteration. So some examples of alliteration in the piece, right? Silent like silence, black and blue bruise, the country sick, tick, shift, stuck in reverse as we try to move forward. Break a broomstick on their back, right? So the use of these, they just help to get his point across effectively, right? It is used for emphasis. Sarcasm, right? So in the piece, the artist laughs and proceeds to say, and yeah, we find that funny, eh? Right? So sarcasm here is used to make the audience immediately question themselves and what they're actually laughing at, which of course is a serious problem, right? It's something that is no joking matter. So it's as though he's calling them out on it. We move on now to personification. Emotions tear through your skin and the country is sick, right? So personification, right? He personifies emotions, but also that at that very moment he says this line, he shows his sleeve, his arm, right? This of course is a hint at people who slice their wrists as a coping mechanism to relieve their stress. I have it in the picture there, right? The emotions really do tear through their skin, right? And the second point there, where the country is sick, he says the country is sick, right? So, of course, this is meant to hint at all of the problems occurring in the country, all of the wrong things that are happening within the country itself. Rhyme and repetition. So, with regards to rhyme, it just generally aids in the overall flow of the piece. And with repetition, um, where he kept saying at the end, don't say nothing. Essentially, this line is constantly repeated at the end to show that people don't view this as something important. To them, it's not even worth a conversation. So he reinforces that by saying, don't say nothing. Now we're going to jump into the content, right? So firstly, we'll look at the effects on children, right? So throughout the piece, he said, we just reinforce silence, right? So this line is powerful in the sense that we teach children to hide emotions and feelings. We beat the want and need to share out of them until they keep it bottled up inside and eventually it leads their own demise, or it can simply manifest in negative ways during adulthood, right? He goes on to say as well, depression and mental illness is white people thing, right? As he spoke those lines, I could hear Trini parents saying that, right? Making it sound as though one's mental state is something that is cultural and is not actually an internal struggle, right? So it's as though um your mental health, your mental state is not existent, right? And I'm sure all of us at some point in time have, experienced this at different degrees and levels. Right? The second point we have here under content is it promotes silence on issues affecting us, right? So, as a result of the way parents make children feel, right, feel as though they cannot share, the child finally learns to be silent and not expressive of their feelings. So they are left alone to battle the struggles that come with adolescence. And as we all know, the teenage years can be very tough on you, right? So to further emphasize how talks of depression is silence, right? Trinidadian parents will quicker acknowledge the Trini custom known as well, tabanca, right? Millet compares tabanca to depression. Trinidadians, they associate tabanca with being lovesick or moping over a significant other that we are no longer in a relationship with, right? And some of the characteristics of tabanca are inclusive of being sad and mopey, you're not eating, you're crying. Now, if this is real to Trinidadians, or right, why is the notion of depression silenced? Right? It shares the same traits listed, right? Some of the same traits that I just listed for tabanca. Depression also shares those traits. right? So why can't depression be real? So this is the question that Millett provokes in this piece. Why can you acknowledge that Tabanka is real but not depression? And finally, the third part here we have is comedic, right? So he says, a little licks never kill nobody. Let me be real. You never really had a good childhood if you never get a good cocktail. So this right here is a very important point to note, right? This is a justification for the cycle to continue, right? So parents feel as though because they made it out alive, right? It's okay to inflict that same pain that they once endured on their young ones, and they do it in the name of discipline, right? Another point he had here was one day this might even be a funny story. And if we're being real honest here, we actually hear people recount, a good cocktail that they get when they were small. They tell stories and they genuinely laugh as they reminisce on these instances where they got some serious licks, right? And he also goes on to say, take a second to laugh as I put your problems second to last. So it's the brushing off of the child or the teenager's struggle, right? So their problems are seen as minuscule and as such it's funny. It also shows our culture with regard to this, right? Because it perpetuates that to that this is funny. A part of Trinidadian culture is laughing at serious problems, and we see it every day, right? We make a joke of everything, right? So a part of our culture is laughing at serious problems and making everything a joke. So these are some of the things that Millett highlights in this piece, and they're very important. Now we're going to move on to the effectiveness, right? So we have the use of the Trinidadian English Creole, right? So the use of the Trinidadian English Creole, it resonates more with the audience and it helps propel his point forward, in a way that makes it easily comprehensible to the audience. Right off the bat, I knew what he was talking about. I could see the message that he was trying to send, right? And with regards to body language, so the way Millett sort of acts out the parts of the piece, it ultimately enhances the piece, right? For example, he gestures the hanging, right, of the child with the belt, right, when he was trying to hint at suicide, right? He gestures that for us. He acts out walking into your child's room and saying, I'm hanging from the belt that you used to incur the bruises. That's what he said, right? He uses the mic as a gear in a car, right? When he says the country sick, stick, shift, stuck in reverse, right? And that is all jargon associated with a car. But in this scenario, he's using that to bring across his point, right? Also, the movement of his fingers when he speaks about beating. So in Trinidad, we have this movement of the fingers that is indicative of someone going to receive some serious licks, a curtail, right? Where we kind of slap our finger against each other and make the noise, like, aha, it's time for licks, right? So these were a few examples of body language, right? But they ultimately contributed to the effectiveness of the piece as a whole, right? They helped, they added something to the piece, made it a bit more comprehensible, a bit more something that the audience could relate to, could understand. And well, that concludes my presentation. So thank you for listening.